Yeah, it's recording now. So
Okay.
what it says starting, it's on. Okay, right here. So the issue here was I said charge polarity is not limited to the type of polarizing characteristics. All charges have no, much earlier than that. Where is it?
1254.
There was talk about sound and pressure and density and all this stuff, and somewhere along the line we've got Rabotilli process. What was it? It was here it is. I made the statement: we measure matter with matter, and for what reasons should measuring matter affect measurement taken? Simple, really. The answer is that electric and magnetic fields interact with electric and magnetic fields, and so does the matter that contains electric and magnetic charge. Electrons contain electric fields and charge. They also contain magnetic fields and charge. Protons contain the same things as do photons. So I'm shortening down. And then I said sarcasm towards the mainstream. And it's a question for mainstream. Now, these facts alone would not have any effect on material being measured, now would they? And it's the claim in science and the mainstream that measurement actually affects the outcome that you measure, which is to be expected. But we don't fully understand how that interaction occurs and what the consequences in our measure are due to it. And then he put back, he says, I'm missing the picture. Jason says, you're missing the picture. Observation collapses particle function due to resonance. And I said, no, not really. Resonance is due to the motion of matter. It is detected by matter constructs that respond to the motion. To understand the behavior, we must examine all the interactions that have happened, just because there's matter involved. I doubt that all interactions are appreciated as having happened. And where is the noted impact remains in, sorry, and where is it noted that the impact remains in the main unexplained or unaccounted for? And then I went on to Rabotilli with his observation about black box. Because in Kirchhoff's statements about black body radiation, in his own notes, he says, I haven't really checked to see whether it holds up. I just think this is what's going on. And therein was the problem, because when you went and checked, you ended up with a different result, which is what Robitaille has been saying in all his papers. I think there's a whole bunch of it now, 15 maybe. But anyway, so then if we're going to be talking about everything being due to resonance and quantum collapse and all the rest of it, I'm saying, well, there's no evidence. It's just all speculation. There's no experiment around that says fluctuating energy and resonance produces a collapse and bingo, we get matter. What I suspect is the case is that matter is created due to an energy release, due to the failure of a null condition. In other words, the charges get so completely cancelled out that you have a null result, and under those extremes, a seed particle expands to tremendous size, and we're talking 100,000 orders of magnitude or thereabouts, and all the surrounding aether surrounds this bubbled chargino and reforms and creates a matter structure to get rid of the null field conditions, because nature doesn't want to have a null field condition. What it's trying to do is, balance out charge, but it can't do that because charges have dimension. So you can't cancel everything out perfectly.
Balance when you try Markland convection.
Yeah, so when it all balances, if you could get perfect charge elimination, and electric and magnetic have to happen simultaneously, but I think there's a bunch more involved. But anyway, if we just achieve those two things, what will happen is, if you're using matter to do it, like let's say you're spinning magnetic fields and electrons and protons, and get them to actually fully cancel out, you'll get a massive explosion because the universe can't handle that condition. So a lot of our understanding is, we think there was an explosion, but what if that's not true? We see electrons racing down an acceleration device like a cyclotron or a linear accelerator or around CERN's loop, and suddenly there's a huge release of energy. The question is was that due entirely to a collision, or did the structure we're trying to spin around the device so fast simply gave up and said, no, I'm not playing this game, and explodes and releases all the energy that was required to get it to accelerate in an instant, and then create a fallout of transient particles as the energy redistributes itself throughout the ether. So, I think fundamentally we don't really understand what's going on, and we make assumptions that we can't prove, and we get speculation that's wrong. And quantum speculation is like Platonic cosmology. There's no proof that this stuff is real.
Almost right on time. Before Jason speaks, though, I want to reply with a little bit of the EPMC and the MEMS philosophy. And I know that the MEMS is philosophy, but the EPMC is not exactly philosophy. First of all, in this framework, resonance is a matter of it's a mathematical demonstration of the law of polarity, because the law of resonance follows the law of polarity. So you end up with a situation where resonance tries to create unity and dissonance, disharmony, or disunity. And so what I would say is that it's not so much that it explodes because it can't handle it, but because it's changing phase state. And that would take away the language that suggests that nature is struggling with itself. I don't think that's true at all.
Well, the terms
another point. Hold on. Another point I would have is that on the big G diagram, all the physics principles, what I call the P power, all exist in the Earth position, and the force itself, the PIM, exists in the wood position, and wood controls Earth, but they're all interrelated. All five are interrelated, and the ether is also then controlled by the physics, but then the ether generates is the mother to the force, the PIM, so much so that they are basically a unity, what I call a unified ether field. And so we don't need another unified field theory. We just need to figure out how the ether flows, and then you have just in that complex interaction of just those three of the five. We're not counting the sixth, right? God in the center. We're just going to count, consciousness or the Lord power in the top, and then ether, numbers, physics, force, ether. And if we have that, we actually have a unity flow. And my point would be that the law of relativity, as applied in social circumstances, would make it difficult for you guys you could be talking about the same thing from a different area of not only the big G diagram, but even in the 8 laws. And you wouldn't realize, because of the fractal nature, that you're saying the same thing. You could even rotate and a month later have the same thought as the other person and totally miss what each other was saying, argue again. And that is the product of the law of relativity, would be my point. All right, so now Jason's popped on. I'd like to hear what he was trying to say.
Just before we get to that, I wanted to use the terms that I explain the terms I use. I use the terms concordant and discordant harmony. So concordance results in stability and structure, and discordance results in destruction.
In communications, we use the term coherence and decoherence. Either have a coherent system or a decoherent. So I can wrap my head around you. Just use different
So what
words.
I'm saying is that the ether structure itself, which is the unifying, there is only one universe, and The ether is just the base level of that universe. The matter structures that occur are complexes of that material. But in terms of the universe, there is a driving principle that promotes stability and construction, and then there's a driving principle that causes disassociation or discordance and destruction. And these two things are in balance. And the extremes between, absolute stability and absolute chaos in terms of destruction are very rare conditions. The majority is somewhere between that too. And what the universe is always trying to do, and as Wild Thornhill and many others have stated, that the universe seeks to have harmonized balance. And so you will get in that system, because of these motional behaviors between matter structures, harmonics, you'll get all the stuff that we're debating about in terms of, how is matter a harmonic oscillation, or is it something else? And I think what we're seeing is an effect, and we think that effect is the structure, and it's not necessary to have that. So in water, because it's got particles, it'll behave in wave-like fashions with kinetic impact and transition of energy, but it'll also form conjugate travel paths where the particles of the water will move from location to location with speed, and that is not wave-like behavior. And when we get to things like light speed being the limit and all the rest of it, well, light speed's only a limit for light, because light interacts with its environment, and that determines how fast things go. So your speed limit is determined with how much interaction you have with the environment. The more interaction you have, the stickier things become, and you get friction and you slow down. The less interaction you have, the faster you go, and you will speed up. So from my point of view, the absolute state of motion, the minimum value, is effectively zero, which you can never achieve. And the fastest speed that any matter construct can go at is infinite, instant, wherever you want to be instantly. And the measure of how fast you're allowed to go is your capacity to interact with the environment and the environment's capacity to interact with you. It's a two-way street. So if you can create the conditions where you're super slippery, you'll go as fast as you like. But
this is where temperature is key. You need to go down to get to that zero you're talking about. You're talking about 0 Kelvin. This is where everything speeds up, and you have superconductivity and everything.
I'm not talking temperature. What I'm talking about, temperature is, from my point of view, is just another type of charge. However, what I'm talking about is not temperature. It's the interaction between the field environment of a construction and the interaction with the field environment of its surroundings.
Robert, let Jason have the floor for a little bit.
If you look at how they're building all these brand new computers to get to a point where you have zero noise in your system, meaning zero interaction with the electric field, you got to reduce your temperature. And this has been well known for 20 years now. To isolate a system from the ether, you have to lower your temperature, because that seems to be a property of the universe itself. And Markland convection plays a big part in the organization of just about everything we see when we look out from the smallest to the largest. And this is why we get the hyperboloid and the torus, and I mean, because this is it's convection, but it's Markland convection, and you can substitute the temperature for charge all you want. It doesn't change your math at all. It actually it brings about a much larger picture as to what we're looking at. Nick brought up some good stuff with looking at spheres in a higher dimension. And now the mainstream view of all these dimensions is quite skewed, and we all know that. I mean, nothing's folded in on itself. It's quite ridiculous. But if you take a different approach and you scale yourself back and you realize that as we sit on the Earth, we can move in 3 dimensions. But the moment you add the sun's motion, you gotta put another axis in there. Now all of our molecules are moving in 4 directions. Now when you add the movement of the galaxy towards the supercluster, you got to add another axis. There's another rotational vector. And now when we add the supercluster moving towards the great attractor, well, here's another axis. And all of our molecules, we might not notice it, but our molecules are being shaken up like a centrifuge in a laboratory.
Yeah.
And this is what gives rise to everything that we see, all the decoherence and the coherence.
Well, under that analogy, the Earth could be traveling at superluminal speed in an environment, but still exhibit the behavior we see in a non-superluminal speed, simply because everything around us is moving at that superluminal speed. And
it's a problem I've got at the moment, because I'm very interested in tracking the motion of the sun at the moment in relation. Now, the only way we're meant to do that at the moment is to measure it in terms of its own eclectic, or whatever it is, eclectic, and so we're seeing these gravitational fluctuations when the planets are dipping one side or the other of this imaginary plane. Now we've got data for seeing how the sun jumps around in the XY direction, but in the Z direction, of course, it brings the eclectic with it all the time. So we can't using those frames of reference, we can't actually see how the sun's bobbing around in terms of the other, unless we triangulate it with other stars. I suppose I'll have to have a look at that. But these frames of reference, this is the problem. The Earth has one, the Sun has one, and just like Jason said, there's about 5 frames of reference that are going to affect a gravitational model before you even start looking at electromagnetics, I'll
just make a quick observation. What we're looking at in terms of motion is a series of contributing factors that we're not aware of all those factors. But that doesn't form a dimensional space in the sense of 4 dimension, 5 dimension. Right? What it is we've got a series of contributing factors to motion that is easier to understand if we talk about mathematical dimensions of axes of motion itself, independent of what's actually going on, which is fine. We're trying to understand the actual motion, so it's a complex.
In the truest sense, that's what a dimension should really be, right? It's a direction of travel. It's not another universe folded up on itself inside the multiverse, or that kind of garbage.
I agree totally with that. However, we do have what I would call spatial dimensional structure in the sense, and I'm very hard on this, that spatial dimensions like length, breadth, and height, to give 3 dimensions for an object in 3-dimensional space, like a sphere or a ball or whatever, those spatial dimensions can only become real if, and only if, they are a prime number. And prime numbers have to be redefined to allow us to have negative and positive prime numbers for the integer number set, the real number set, and the complex number set. And when we do that, we get a universe that has nested spaces. And by that I mean dimension 0 exists within dimension 2 space, that exists, and dimension 2 space lives in dimension 3 space. Sorry, I skipped the dimension. So you got dimension 0.
Quaternions.
Yeah, dimension 0 is a length dimension, right? This is length dimensional space. So 0 is location. Dimension 1 is direction, and it can be negative or positive. And then you got dimension 2, which is a plane, which can be, again, negative or positive. But dimension 2 contains dimension 1, which contains dimension 0. And dimension 3 contains dimension 2. Dimension 5, which is our next prime number, contains dimension 3. and then dimension 7 containing 5, then dimension 11 containing 7, and so on up the prime number set or down the prime number set. And what we have is matter constructs can be turned inside out. And if I have negative prime numbers, then I get to go from a positive dimensional structure to a turned inside out negative dimensional structure, and it still exists within the universe. It's not something, you know, elsewhere or out of the universe. It's actually inside